The Winnipeg Baroque Festival will be picking up steam once again, starting tonight with 9 concerts in the next 8 days. Classic 107 will be live on location for the concerts tomorrow, featuring Fidem in Fidibus, or Faith in Fiddles, at St. Margaret's Anglican Church in Wolseley at 2 p.m., and then at the Desatel Concert Hall for the concert featuring Canzona called Bed, Bach, and Beyond at 7:30 p.m. You can learn more about both concerts at our website this morning, classic107.com and the Classic 107 app. Another unique pair of concerts will be taking place next Monday and Wednesday at Canadian Mennonite University's Laudamus Auditorium. Violinist Karl Stobbe will be presenting 2 distinct programs entitled the Goldberg Variations Plus and a new take on an old mystery, respectively. He'll be joined by a special collaborator in these musical endeavors, Berlin-based pianist Benjamin Moser. Both join me in the Classic 107 studios this morning. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, good morning.
Nice to see you. Maybe we can start with you here, Benjamin, since we talk to Karl a lot. We'll get your voice in to start here. I'm wondering, how did your musical partnership begin with Karl?
Well, we've known each other for quite a while now. We both have a Mennonite background, actually, and our families have lots of ties, I would say. We first played, I think, 3 years ago in Holland or something like that. Bit more,
Maybe
before
a
the
bit more.
pandemic, actually.
Wow.
So 3 years ago plus the pandemic.
That's right. And we played some Prokofiev and some...
Parrot.
Yes, exactly. Our
Wow.
part.
And John Williams, actually.
John Williams.
We played Schindler's List.
That's right. And we had a wonderful time.
Yep.
And now you get to play something completely different in the form of J.S. Bach. Maybe we can start with your first concert, which takes place on Monday night, the Goldberg Variations Plus, and audience members can probably guess quite easily what will be featured on that program. Maybe I can take you both back to the first time you heard the Goldberg Variations. Obviously a very iconic piano work. Benjamin, what do you remember about the first time that you heard it?
Well, obviously I heard it with Mr. Gould for the first time, who is a legend and is absolutely connected to this piece. It's his piece, basically. And it's not so easy to kind of discern yourself from that or to kind of, find your own, let's say, speech in it, your own version, let's say. But the first time I listened to it, I was immediately spellbound. I couldn't stop listening to it, and I must have heard the piece 1,000 times before I played it myself.
Wow. What about for you, Karl? As a piece that's written for piano, what do you take away from that sort of first time you hear it as a violinist?
I think the first time I heard it, I probably heard it before I was a university student. But the first time I really remember it, I was a university student, and it was Glenn Gould. And one of my teachers had said, you should go and listen to this. I was playing some solo Bach, and they said, if you really need to, have this in your head. So I was probably 18 or something, and I went and listened to it. I was completely spellbound by it. It's incredible. It just features so much of the piano, every nuance that a piano was capable of, or a keyboard, I suppose. And the language that Bach used was just so captivating.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I wish I could play the violin like this. And so I immediately, because I listened to Gould's younger performance, the movements of the Bach got faster, and the slower ones got slower. And my teacher said, well, that's not exactly what I wanted you to take away from it. But
it's a fun study in contrast, though, at the same time. Benjamin, you touched on this as well. And Karl, you also have just sort of alluded to this idea of there's this sort of ownership that certain performers have of pieces like the Goldberg Variations, both of you citing Glenn Gould, obviously, as the sort of definitive performer of the Goldberg Variations. How do you steer away from wanting to be Glenn Gould in your performances and then create something that is sort of uniquely your own? Obviously, a bit of that is accomplished by the fact that it's a violin and piano shared responsibility in that regard.
Well, not in this case. I mean, I'm going to play the
You'll
solo
play the
version,
solo,
of
yeah.
course. I think what's important to mention is also that Glenn Gould himself played another version, 1981, which was completely different from his first version, which really gives you an idea on how different you can play this piece and how differently you can interpret it. I think over the years you realize also how universal this music is and how much you can do with it, without kind of copying anybody. There's so many options.
Yeah.
From the first time I heard this piece, actually, I felt this would be the piece that I would take to the lonely island if I had to choose one piece.
Yeah.
Because of this universality,
Sure. Maybe Karl, but what about for you? How do you approach that sort of unique quality to this kind of a piece?
So obviously I don't play the Goldberg Variations, but
Yeah.
But the truth is with every piece of music, and especially I think with Bach and solo Bach, there's just so much you can say with it, and so many different things you can say with it. I think that every time I play a piece, it's different, and then they all are different than everybody else plays them too. It's when you, as a teacher, it's one of the great difficulties you have in saying, how do you let your students be themselves and do stuff that is unique to them without kind of imposing your own ideas on it. And every time I hear a recording, I feel like I'm a student on it too. So I say, well, I don't love the way this happens, although I love the performance of it, but it's not me. I would elect to do it somewhere, some other way. And so, eventually, if you play it enough times, you just kind of develop your own voice on it.
What else, Benjamin, what else can people hear on this program that helps to complement this sort of own voice that you two are bringing to the city of Winnipeg as collaborators?
Well, I guess in this particular program, I'm just going to play the Goldberg Variations in my own version, which is by definition something that only I can offer in this case.
Yeah, for sure.
But Karl will introduce something else, which is Isai, actually, in the first half of the program.
Yeah, the first part of the program is Isai's first sonata for solo violin. So you're getting an iconic piano piece, the great theme and variations maybe ever written. And the first part, the Isai first violin sonata, is deeply connected to Bach and Baroque music because Isai wrote it after hearing a performance of Bach's G minor solo violin sonata by Szigeti, right? I always get Szigeti and Zering mixed up. I think it was Joseph Szigeti.
Okay.
And he heard it, and he commented to a friend, why hasn't anybody else written a major solo violin sonatas? And the answer was it was a little bit out of fashion, but Bach's overwhelming influence has sort of scared a few people off, I think, from doing it. And I said, I'm going to go and write it. Because I was a great violinist, the great violinist of his day. And the legend has it is he went into his studio over a weekend, and he had somebody bring him food and everything, and he sketched out 6 sonatas over a weekend and came out with them. I have a somewhat hard time believing it because there's got to be 30 or 40,000 notes, and I don't think you could copy that many out in a weekend, let alone actually compose them. But I'll go with the legend. It's pretty fun.
The story's always better, right?
Yeah, and you can hear it. The first sonata, it doesn't sound. It's not the same harmonic language as Bach, but it's the same technical language. And it's the same kind of compositional language, the use of counterpoint, the use of chords, the use of voicing, I think is actually very much like Bach.
It's really interesting that you build on this sort of idea that has been going throughout the Baroque Festival that we've noticed, in that there are ensembles that are performing repertoire that not only is from the Baroque, but that speaks across the centuries into the Baroque era. The Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, for instance, on Wednesday presenting not only works by Bach and Vivaldi, but also pieces by Penderecki, for example, as well as something by Manitoba's own Jocelyn Morlock to try and make that bridge happen. You're also performing, Karl, on Wednesday this week in another program called A New Take on an Old Mystery, another sort of iconic piece that will be getting a bit of a 21st century sort of a remodel, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. So the very first piece on the program is going to be, I think it's called the Bieber Suite. There was some conversation back and forth as to what it should be titled. It is taken from a series of violin sonatas that Heinrich Bieber, a great violinist in his day, and his day would have been probably late 1600s.
Yes. Yeah.
And composer, he wrote a series of sonatas which are called the Mystery Sonatas or the Rosary Sonatas. They're connected to the Stations of the Rosary in the Catholic traditions, and I have long loved these pieces. They're wonderful pieces, but they're not really written for a modern violinist. In that the violin for each of the sonatas is tuned differently.
Right.
So you have very different tunings. In one case, actually, Bieber says that you need to cross the strings. You need to switch the A and the D strings over. So these pieces don't get a lot of airtime anymore because of the difficulties in adapting them to a modern violin, or at least a modern violin setup. Seeing that the violin itself is not that different, but the setup is quite different.
Yeah, there's just like a logistical sort of a challenge that exists
There's a
there.
logistical challenge. So I asked my friend and the wonderful Canadian composer Michael Osterley if he would write a version of some, or take a collection of the movements and write a version for modern violin and piano.
Okay. So now that gets that sort of, that's that remodel that I was that I was alluding to earlier. What sort of quality do these pieces, like if you hear the originals, which they're quite haunting to listen to because of that sort of tuning and the different logistics of the instrument, they take on a very sort of dark, maybe is the wrong word, but you get like a very, it feels like you're entering a chamber. Like it feels like you're entering like a very dark cloister or something like that, to build on the Catholic theme. How do these new approaches to these mystery sonatas, these new takes on the old mystery, if you will, how does that mystery then change as a result of this new approach?
Well, I mean, some of them are dark and some of them are light, and because some of them are bright, he sometimes the tension is added to the strings to make it maybe harsher. So I think what Michael does, first of all, he obviously adapts them to a format that can be played, but then he takes the accompanying part, if you will, the piano part, and he turns it into something that's more than an accompaniment. It becomes a very colorful addition to it, which I think takes or adds the different colors, layers that Bieber had when he made the string tuning all different, and he kind of writes that into the other part.
Okay.
And so the harmonic language is 21st century. But funny enough, like the violin part is kind of unchanged. It sounds a lot like Bieber, but when you add the piano part, it becomes very colorful. A different kind of color, different kind of textures. And so you won't be hearing Bieber exactly. You'll be hearing a take on it, a very colorful take on it. I think it's really cool, actually. I'm really enjoying learning it.
Almost like you're developing like a photo with a different sort of a process, and you get different sort of elements that are pulled out of the photograph as a result. Maybe, Benjamin, a last question to you. What do you think Winnipeg audiences will appreciate and take away from these sort of different looks, these different contexts, in the case of your performance of the Goldberg Variations, on these very beloved Baroque masterworks?
Well, first of all, I think people will just enjoy this piece, since it's a piece that we can all love and cherish over the centuries. It's timeless. It's a piece that gives us joy, spirit, strength, and at the same time connecting it then in the other program with some more contemporary ideas. It also gives us an idea how we can bridge the centuries, musically speaking. And in this program that Karl just mentioned, we're also going to play a sonata by Handel and a Brahms sonata. So we're also continuing this trend of kind of connecting the musical centuries with each other in spirit and in ideas. And I think there's a lot of joy to be gained in not being only a purist, let's say, in terms of Baroque music, but to see the outlook, and the perspective, let's say, on this genre. And I think that's a very it's just a wonderful thing to do, I think, to mix these genres.
The joy is palpable between the two of you for these two concerts. That takes place on April 14th and 16th. So that's the Goldberg Variations Plus on April the 14th, and a new take on an old mystery April the 16th, next Monday and Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. at Canadian Mennonite University's Laudamus Auditorium. You can find more information at winnipegbaroquefestival.com or later on this morning on the Classic 107 website and app. Karl Stobbe, Benjamin Moser, such a joy to have you here in the Classic 107 studios today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.